Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports, coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond, and London, England, as well as Paris, France, of course. You good old boys in Canada, we love you in Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south in the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful March the 3rd, 2020. Rondo Deportes, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys down south?
Well, Charlton, we've been having some horrific weather down here in the south. A horrific tornado touchdown in Tennessee, and hopefully all those people are doing well that survived that. They had 22 fatalities in that, Charlton, so
wow.
Hopefully people will start to recover down in Knoxville.
Well, we give them our thoughts and prayers, and we wish them nothing but the best. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and we sent you, as well as a fleet of Cadillac cars. You can also find out that Big C Sports is powered by Google and Alexa. Just say Google and Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear Welcome to the Show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he will do his thing. And I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and there's a Apple TV, a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. In fact, my TV's so smart, Big C, when I say turn on, it turns off. When I say turn off, it turns off, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, technology has moved America and the world along in the past several decades, so as everything advances, we get less and less useful.
Yeah, I watched the movie HAL 2000. I might go back to those TVs that they don't call smart TVs, one that I have to turn on with my own hands, but it's all fair in love and war. I do want to make sure that we give out our Veterans Crisis Hotline. I know you mentioned there's some inclement weather happening down south, and maybe people can call that too if they need help. They are experienced in helping veterans and their loved ones. It's 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. Or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. If you are online, simply go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veteranscrisisline.net, and they can get some help. Big C, why is that so important to you?
Well, Charlton, it's hard for people in everyday life to fathom what the veterans of this country go through. As we talked about the tornadoes down in Knoxville, Tennessee, I know that affected several veterans in that area, Charlton, because they're all over America. And the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, Charlton, is there to speak to people, to hopefully guide people through these troubled times, because of the some 19 suicides we have committed every day in America by veterans, and an equal number of everyday citizens, especially our youth, Charlton, are having to deal with this horrific disease and affliction.
Yep.
And as we think about our thoughts and prayers going to the people down in Knoxville, we would like for our thoughts and prayers to go out every day to our great veterans of this country who have served with honor and dignity, Charlton, but they've come back home and haven't been given that same honor and dignity, as many of them have fallen on hard and depressed times, Charlton, in our society.
Yep.
The National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is there for them to have a voice to listen to and talk to, but they also have to have access to be able to reach the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, Charlton. Many of our veterans are homeless and destitute and don't have access to a phone line or a cellular device, so we have to find a way as a country to give all our great veterans access to help.
And we'll do our part to definitely help with the Veterans Crisis Hotline, 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. Or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. If you're online, go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veteranscrisisline.net, and they can get some help. You know, people out here are driving cars all over California, and I got a friend named Sonny I want to say hi to. Sometimes you can't drive a car unless it gets smog. There's a lot of people that need to hear that message. Also, I'm very happy that Big C Sports, we are launching on the real estate show. It's the spring of 2020. The goal is to get 100 real estate brokers to list their properties on TV as opposed to just doing door knocking or Facebook or other type of ancillary marketing. They can still do that, but it's nice we can go to your TV listing channel and have a chance to get some people paying attention to your properties. Really looking forward to that. So much happening in the world of sports, Big C, and I know we always talk about professional sports. I mean, Miami Heat, they got kind of hot in Milwaukee because they were down there in Miami. People don't understand that when you go down and play in South Beach, sometimes you get your legs get a little bit heavy. That makes any sense? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you look at this time of the year, everybody's legs get heavy in the NBA. I mean, we're a long way into the season, and I mean, there's still some games to go, but when you think that you've already at this point played some 60 games of the NBA season, and that load and wear, and a lot of players don't deal with load management, Charlton.
No, they don't deal with load management at all. In fact, from what I understand, when people go down to Miami, they like to get off of their feet, if that makes any sense to you, Big C. It's all fair and love and war, but Giannis came up against a pretty, tough defense last night down in Miami. Tonight's NBA schedule, we have San Antonio. They're at Charlotte. Brooklyn is at Boston. Man, the Celtics have been losing some close games to L.A. and also to Houston Western Conference. Now they get an Eastern Conference foe, and we'll see if they have more luck tonight in Boston. Minnesota's playing at New Orleans. Zion Williamson is going to get a couple of slam dunks. The L.A. Clippers at OKC. This is most likely two teams that will somehow end up in the playoffs. We need a healthy Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and then Chris Paul plays with a chip on his shoulder. But this is a game that you can't relax too much if you're the Clippers going down to OKC. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you look at these two teams and the player transactions that have gone on, I mean, you have to ask yourself, which is the better of these two teams compared to last year?
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. I mean, I would think the Clippers are better, but it's something about that team, OKC, when they're down in Oklahoma, what they call the Dust Bowl, they tend to play with a little bit of chip on their shoulder. So the Clippers have got to make sure they pay attention to that.
You look at the Clippers from last year. The Clippers are a team that won 43 games last year.
Yeah.
They're a team that was going to make the playoffs regardless of these off-season acquisitions that they made. But when you look at OKC and how they fared bringing in Chris Paul, they're probably the most improved team in the Western Conference when you look at where they're stacked at right now. They're in a solid position for 4 or 5 seed in the playoffs once the playoffs start. And then when you look at Chris Paul and you talk about most valuable players just in the Western Conference alone, everybody knows who LeBron James is. He's always the most valuable player in the NBA, whether he gets the vote or not at the end of the year by the media, Charlton. And people had a lot of high praises for the Kawhi Leonard there with the Clippers. But when you look at the contribution of what Chris Paul has done with OKC, and even what he did in the All-Star festivities there in Chicago a week or so ago, you have to really give him consideration of being one of the top 3 players in the NBA right now.
I've always liked his attitude. And it seems like he doesn't have to share the ball, with Harden anymore. And maybe he's more of the leader on that team now. So we'll see what happens to them. I still think the Clippers are going to get that game. Golden State is at Denver. I know there's talk about Steph Curry playing sometime this year. Maybe just tired of shooting baskets by himself, Big C, or with his training staff. But we'll see what happens when he comes back. It's probably going to be sometime next week. The defending NBA world champion Toronto Raptors, Big C, they're down in the Valley of the Sun where it can get hot even though they play inside. They're at the Phoenix Suns tonight. A big game on the West Coast, media-wise anyway. Philadelphia at the LA Lakers. I know there's so many people that say Philly's having their issues, but you have something that happens when you play in the LA limelight. People tend to want to play up. Everybody wants to do that. There's always a chance to have a movie director in the seat standing, sitting courtside. There's always something they're playing for more. So maybe Joel Embiid will have a better game tonight, but I still look at the Lakers getting on that one. And then Washington is at the Sacramento Kings. Give me your thought about Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, coming out to L.A. where everybody wants to live in L.A., allegedly. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Philadelphia is coming out to L.A. and they'll take a loss in this game, Charlton. If you look at their lineup, it's depleted. Ben Simmons is going to be out probably the next week to 10 days. Joel Embiid injured his shoulder the last time out, so he most likely won't be playing. So they're going to be playing with a depleted lineup against the Lakers. So this is an opportunity for the Lakers to get healthy and get a win at home.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for them also. We know it's about positioning coming down the final stretch. We'll be in the NBA playoffs in the blink of an eye, Big C. So a lot of teams are trying to tune up, and we'll see if some of that load management is helping. Maybe what's happening in Philly is a little bit of load management where they're saying guys are injured as opposed to, taking the day off. They don't get the boot. They don't get booed like Santa Claus. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, no, Ben Simmons is actually out with back nerve problems, and Joel Embiid injured his left shoulder against Cleveland last week, Charlton. So they have some serious injuries that are going to cause concern once they get into the playoffs. How healthy will their lineup be?
Yeah, how healthy will their lineup be? We'll see what happens. Looking forward to a great night of NBA action. I want to take the ball and I want to bounce it down to the role of NCAA conferences, Big C. We talk so much about money and how much money each school makes, how much money a conference makes. How important is television actually to people that watch college basketball is really important. But as we look at some of the NCAA conferences and the schools payout by $1.5 million in the last fiscal year, Big C, I just want to get your thoughts. And I think many people already know, if you're looking at television revenue, you really can start with the Big Ten. Even though they're not good at math, they have about 19 schools in their conference, Big C, but the Big Ten, they lead all conferences in revenue. They pulled in $759 million for its 12 conference schools. Each school received about $54 million per share. Big C, that's not bad for having free labor. Big C, your thoughts?
Charlton, that's not bad cheese when you think about being up there in the Midwest, Charlton. And the Big Ten, I mean, everybody would think probably that the SEC was the leader in that, but that's based on football.
Yeah.
When you look at the Big Ten overall paralysis of what they do in sports, football, basketball, Charlton, college hockey and baseball, track and field, the Big Ten is the leader. They got 14 members in their conference, Charlton. But I think that 12, take that back, 12 members in their conference. But
yeah.
When you look at what they do as far as television revenue with the Big Ten network, when you think about the Big Ten, Charlton, they don't have any teams in the top 10 media markets in the U.S.
No, they don't. And it's a fact that a lot of the times, when you think about large media markets, and I know we go over that quite a bit, it does matter. But when you have it in a smaller market, everything is more affordable, so you can actually have that expendable dollar and go out and do that and go out to see games. But also, when I look at the Big Ten,
we're talking about television revenue, what they're making. It's not about going out seeing games. You think about what the cost of a spot would cost in New York versus being somewhere in East Lansing, Michigan, Charlton, the revenue differential, or even, you think about Penn State, in Happy Valley. So when you talk about television revenue, that's where media market size matters. How much does a spot cost on radio and television?
Well, the fact that they do have the number of schools that they have, and they may not be in the biggest media markets, but that conference has been so established going way back in the day. I think even military, they used to do it at Camp Brownell Stadium. A lot of the military, when we had those stadiums set up. I also look at the fact that when you're in a conference where it's oftentimes cold, people don't go out as much the way they do in California. So TV, the old way of thinking, is you're going to find eyeballs in the home when the weather's 15 and 20 degrees outside, as opposed to maybe 60 degrees outside in California. So they count on eyeballs being at home. That may also play into why they had such revenue. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you got to be realistic. I mean, eyeballs at home, everybody has a television.
Yeah.
When you look at the population of those markets, and you show me a city in the Big Ten that has a population of over 1.5 million people, it doesn't exist. And so when you talk about eyeballs at home, you're going to have more opportunities for eyeballs when you have a larger media market. The larger media market means population.
Yeah.
And so if the population is not there, how can you have more eyes when you have less population?
Well, I know they added Rutgers for that reason out of New Jersey. You have the whole New York, New Jersey market. So that's one of the largest media markets in the country, especially New York City. And
they get 12 people that attend their games.
But the media, there's a lot more than 12 people in that media market that has New York and New Jersey. So that's a reason. That's the only reason they allow them to join the Big Ten Conference, is to get the recruiting hooked into those East Coast high school programs, and I think that's helped them a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're always trying to grow. But the Big Ten, again, whether it's football, we know that football is very strong. Their basketball is dominant. Maybe not as much in baseball, definitely not as much in track and field, but they've been carried by their football and their basketball programs over the years. I also want to go to the number 2 conference, And money rules everything. We talked about Tony Romo getting the $17 million, and he's not even sure why he got that kind of money. But the SEC, Southeastern Conference, they came in second with $659 million in total revenue distributed between its 14-member teams, with an average of $44,600,000 per university for the free labor, and that's about $100 million short of what the Big Ten is doing, even though they have more schools. So the math adds up more for the Big Ten. Big C, your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, the Big Ten is getting the lion's share of the revenue when you think out there how strong their network is. And the Big Ten network is the number one generator of the money because the Big Ten network operates year-round. It covers their football, basketball, baseball, track and field, swimming, and all their other sports, Charlton, tennis and golf. Where in the SEC, their major revenue comes from CBS during the football season because they are the broadcast network of the SEC football. But you think about how dominant the SEC has been in football, and their basketball has really been dominant across the landscape just as well as the Big Ten, winning multiple national championships down there over the past couple of decades. But when we look at these schools, Charlton, they have a common denominator. When we look at the SEC, you can't name an SEC team that's even in a top 20 media market in the United States. So something about their athletic programs and what they do generating revenue speaks volumes.
Yeah, I think it helps us. When you're in a major city, one of the reasons that people want to come out to L.A. or maybe even New York, there's a lot to do. They want to go down to Miami because there's so much to do. I remember as we compare conferences, how over the years, really going back to the 80s, and you can even say the 90s, the Miami Hurricanes, they dominated the world of college football for about a good 20-year stretch. They were always in the thick of things, a lot like Alabama is right now. And this is a major market, but they rarely had a sellout at the Orange Bowl. I mean, there were always some empty seats at the top.
No, they always had sellout. If you look at their attendance that they had at the Orange Bowl, because it was downtown Miami and close to that Coral Gables campus, where they're sitting in Fort Lauderdale now, it's hard for the students to get to. That's just like in Los Angeles with UCLA playing out in Pasadena. The Orange Bowl was always rocking, and I think Miami had a 58-game home winning streak, and that was largely due in part to the raucous crowds that they had down there.
Well, I still remember it was the University of Washington with Don James that went in there and snapped that winning streak, and I think they had Napoleon Kaufman as the running back, and I believe it was down in South Beach, Florida. It wasn't a sold-out crowd. Maybe they could say sold-out crowd, but not everybody came to that game. There was some empty seats up top, but it's still a good game. I remember that. I also want to go to just a thought, too. We talked about the Big Ten, and they've expanded their conference. You can go all the way from Minnesota all the way to the East Coast, now New Jersey, and you can go down, in Indiana, et cetera. So they're pretty much in the North, Midwest, now you can say East also. The SEC, they've expanded by adding on, it was Texas A&M, that's the furthest west they go, and then they also added Missouri, so they grew west. Imagine going from the south of Florida, down at Florida, and then you come all the way west to Texas A&M, and then north, I would say, as far as Missouri, and then so that is a conference that covers pretty much all parts of the southeast of the United States. So maybe not in large schools, Big C, not in large cities, but they do have a large swath of the country, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, they have a large swath of the country, but even they have 14 teams that cover that swath.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to the Big Ten that only has 12 teams in their conference, Charlton, there's a reason why that network, and like I said, the SEC has its own dedicated network, where the SEC does not have a dedicated network. And so when you think about creating revenue without a dedicated network, the SEC would actually be the dominant conference if they had their own dedicated network like the Big Ten does.
I guess Notre Dame, I understand NBC is really Notre Dame's network, even though they don't call it that. But I understand TV adds a lot. I want to also come out to the Pac-12 conference. Going back into the 70s where they were the Pac-8, it was always USC or UCLA, and at times Washington or Stanford would creep up to the top of the heap. And lately it's been Oregon, it's been Washington, and then Utah, as some of the other programs in the South have had to rebuild. But I want to look at also, when we look at the Big 12, as we jump to the Big 12, because those schools too were competing, and there was talk about Texas joining the Pac-10 conference now, or the Pac-12 now. But the Big 12 coming at number 3, that's at $417,600,000 to be distributed between its 12-member conference teams, and that's an average of $34,800,000 per university. And we know that Big 12, they had lost Nebraska. I know they lost one of their staple programs, and they're still ranking pretty high when it comes to TV revenue. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Nebraska's part of the Big Ten now, and they've struggled since they've been in that conference. And so they're not really, I don't think, helping the Big Ten revenue. They're the benefactors of being in the Big Ten when they look at revenue-wise. But when you think about the Big 12, we talk about that same thing, again, in the middle of the country, and no dedicated television market. I know Texas has their own network,
the Longhorn Network.
The Longhorn Network, but nobody else in that conference has a network. And so when you think about the revenue being generated in those small cities that the Big 12 is played in, the largest city in the Big 12, I believe, is Austin, Texas, of all of those flagship universities. Norman, Oklahoma is not that big, when you look at the Big 12. In Waco, Texas, where Texas Tech is playing. So they don't have a lot of big universities, but they're generating a lot of great revenue down there in the middle of the country.
Yeah, well, there's TCU. So they're part of that Big 12. They're at Fort Worth, which is a Dallas metroplex, so that's a pretty large market for them. But that would be their largest media center. Even though TCU is not the most dominant school in that conference, it's Oklahoma. And perception-wise, it's Texas. But then Baylor came on last year too, so it's always gonna switch. But Oklahoma seems to have that on lockdown, Big C. I want to also go to the southern part again of the country. We talked about the SEC, which is primarily in the South, even coming down. I mean, they're venturing into the Southwest because they added Texas A&M in that conference. When you go to the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, Big C, they have with a conference income of $470 million in revenue, and that's distributed between its 15-member conference teams with an average of $30,700,000 per university. And before them, we'll get the Pac-12. But I want to save the Pac-12 for something different. I want you to give me your thoughts on the ACC. You're looking at schools that go as far south as the University of Miami, which to me, why they're not part of the SEC is because you have the SEC, the ACC, and the Big East actually in that conference out of the state of Florida, with Florida State, Miami. They're all in different conferences, but Miami and Florida State in the ACC. So when you get ACC at $470 million, they're in a part of the country where it's expensive to live in Miami. I know if you go up to Clemson, it's not as expensive as living in metropolitan Miami, but they still have a pretty decent revenue, $470 million. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, if you look up and down that East Coast, Charlton, where they are, it's Tallahassee, Miami. You look at Wake Forest in that conference, Charlton. There's North Carolina State, Syracuse, way up there in the Northeast.
Yeah.
So as you look at that conference as a whole and what they produce, and the quality of basketball mainly out of the ACC, when you think about national powers, people always think ACC and basketball. They're always on television.
Yeah.
Being one of the most competitive conferences in America, and always getting at least 6 to 8 teams in the NCAA tournament. And we've seen what football has done over the past 2 decades. Florida State winning national championships, Clemson winning national championships. So these programs have kept them up on the map. The competitive-wise, North Carolina State has been competitive as well as Syracuse over the years. So the ACC has produced a great brand of football, basketball, and even their baseball teams are dominant.
Yeah, it really is a great place. It's also seasonal. It's very nice weather for the most part when you're in that part of the country. I want to swing it back out here where I am and on the West Coast. The Pac-12 conference coming in number 4 when it comes in at $370,800,000 for its 12-member conference teams or conference programs. Big C, with an annual contribution of $30,900,000 per university. And I know that the Pac-12 is mostly California-centric. They went from the Pac-10, actually the Pac-8 back in the 70s. They became the Pac-12 right around in the 80s. And then they just made it they added those 2 teams when they came into the 2000s, beg your pardon, the Pac-10 in the 80s, and in the 2000s they became in the Pac-12 just a couple of years ago when they added Utah and they added Colorado. I know they added Utah for what reason? Maybe just to add more growth going to the Midwest Big C. But Utah really doesn't serve a purpose, in my opinion, being in that conference. Maybe Colorado does, and BYU would have made more sense, but they still want to play independent for college football. But you have the Pac-12 stretches from, I won't say the Canadian border, but you do have Washington and Washington State up north, and then as far south as Arizona and Arizona State. So almost from Canada to Mexico for the Pac-12, all along the Pacific Ocean, and they've moved east, actually going into Utah and then also Colorado. Give me your thoughts on the Pac-12. Most of their schools are really in smaller markets outside of the West Coast. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, ironically, they're not in smaller markets. If you think about the Pac-12 has 7 teams in the top 22 media markets in the country. So when you think about revenue, the Pac-12 should actually lead the entire country in revenue if you look at revenue that comes from media and broadcasting, Charlton, because of the dominance of the television markets that they represent. But as you look at it, they're number 4 overall financially. And you think about where they are. The Pac-12 has its own network, just like the Big Ten.
Yeah.
But there's light years between the Pac-12 network and the Big Ten network as far as the revenue that these are generating. And you think about the Pac-12 years ago, they had one of the dominant football conferences. They've always played solid baseball. Basketball has been up and down with them over the past few years. But, you got to try to figure out why the Pac-12 is not generating revenue when you have 7 of the top 22 media markets in the country that your teams represent.
I think that's a very salient point. If you take out USC, UCLA, that's Los Angeles market. Just say if they were not in the conference. You take out Cal and Stanford, that's the San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose Bay Area. So if they were not in the conference,
you would still have five of the top 22 media markets taking those 2 teams out.
But think about it. And
no other conference has that.
You have Spokane, Washington, which is a small market. That's in eastern Washington State. University of Washington, yes. But if you look at Oregon, you look at Eugene, Oregon, and Corvallis, those are small markets. If you go down to Arizona, Tempe, Arizona is not a big market. Neither is where the University of Arizona plays. And then if you look at Boulder, Colorado, that's not a major market. It's outside of Denver, of course. But then you look at Utah.
Boulder is considered part of the Denver market, as well as Corvallis is considered part of the Portland market, just like you have Washington, which is the Seattle market.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the Arizona market, Charlton, you get Arizona State as part of that Phoenix market. So you have 5 of the top 22 markets that those represent. Like I said, the University of Colorado is part of the Denver market.
Yeah. I mean,
but you have San Francisco, you have the Los Angeles market. You have the 2 largest media markets on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And those universities, like I said, you have the largest media representation of any athletic conference in America in the Pac-12, and yet when you look at distribution amongst teams for our total revenue, they actually are right there between 4th and 5th place.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the Pac-12 network starting to slow to the game. In fact, a couple of years ago, it was hard to even find, listening to other media outlets in the Bay Area, they were asking, how can we find, Pac-10s, or actually Pac-12 sports? And it was a long time to get it worked out with the networks, and that helped them a lot too. It's just a matter of publicity and not getting out there. I think that's what happened. They were behind the 8 ball. If a lot of teams...
But think about it. When you have 7 of the top 22 media outlets, districts in the United States, how can you not be able to advertise your product and get it out there, letting people know about it? Because the revenue, regardless of what we look at, ticket sales and all of that stuff, the number 1 revenue for all athletics comes from advertising and promotional sponsorship. The banners that you hang in the stadiums, what you sell those for to advertisers and sponsors. The television commercial revenue that you generate. The network money that you sign for as a conference. Why would the Pac-12 be so far behind everybody else in that? And you only have 12 teams in that conference, just like you have in the Big 12 and just like you have in the SEC. SEC has 14. But, when you look at the ACC and those conferences, like I said, from these smaller cities, why do they have such an advantage in those conferences over the Pac-12?
And I think that the thing that you bring up is that most of the teams that have the larger TV conferences, I want to get into it after we take the Big C pause, also known as the Big C timeout, because I think it's interesting to talk about. We'll take the Big C pause. We'll be back in just a moment. We're going to come back and talk more about why certain markets don't have the same revenue. We'll be back in just a moment. All right, we're back from the Big C Timeout, also known as the Big C Pause. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Spreaker.com. And the apps that I love are by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing. And I really appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Really appreciate that. Also launching a real estate listing channel in the spring of 2020, looking for 100 real estate brokers to list their properties on TV, and that can make them more of a superstar. Really looking forward to that. Big C, as we go back to that comment you made, and this is maybe for all the conferences too, the Big Ten leads all conferences in revenue. And as you just mentioned, none of those universities are in major cities. They're not in Detroit. They're not in Cleveland. They're not even in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Big C. They're in smaller markets, East Lansing, Michigan, College Station, Columbus, Ohio. And I think that ties into also the SEC. There are no major media markets that have those schools. It's not Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It's not Gainesville, Florida. Those programs are in smaller cities. So my thought is the smaller cities have less to do, and they're going to count the eyeballs being at home. If you're in California, or maybe even in New York, there's so much to do. Even down in Miami, there's a lot to do, Big C. And so people don't stay at home as much. Plus the weather, even right now, we're still in the wintertime. It's about 70 degrees in California. It's uncomfortable because it's too hot. I'm sure some parts of the East Coast are in the Midwest. They're down into the 30s and 40s still, from what I understand from the people that I know. And I think that has a lot to do with it. People don't just sit in front of the TV, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, but media size, Charlton, is what you're able to sell spots for. It's based on media market size, is what the value of a spot is. Cost per point, which is cost per million, is how they sell television and radio.
Yeah.
And so if you have a larger media size, then you're able to demand more. You talked about Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The population of Tuscaloosa, Alabama is 101,000 people.
Yeah.
The population of Bryant-Denny Stadium is 103,000 people. So there's more people that can attend the stadium that live in the city where that stadium sits. So when you think about that, you could enter the town of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and you haven't made a blip on the radar in Los Angeles to attend a USC or UCLA game. So when you say supply and demand, the stadium size is the stadium size.
Yeah.
It's about the product that you're marketing. Do people really care about it, or do they want to see it? Are they fixated to it? When you think about Pullman, Washington, for example, the population of Pullman, Washington, 68,000. Stadium size, 34,000.
Yeah.
And they can't fill the stadium, and yet the stadium is half the population of the city. So those things, I'm trying to find out where's the correlation between them.
I think it's just there's a lot more to do in the major markets. I don't know about Pullman, Washington.
So there's more to do in Pullman, Washington than there is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and the population of Pullman, Washington is twice of what the stadium size is?
That might be culture, though, Big C. I think if you're on the West Coast, a lot of people that I knew that lived up in Kalispell, Montana, that's a small town. It's east of Spokane, Washington. A lot of people from there end up going to Washington State. When they wanted to go out to have fun, they talked about traveling way into Seattle, which is a pretty long drive. A lot of those small towns don't have the same
We're
interest.
not talking about going to Seattle to have a good time. We're talking about on college game day, Saturday, when the population of your stadium is half that of the population of your city, and you can't fill your stadium.
Yeah.
We're talking just the general population.
Well, that's a question I don't know the answer to. I think it depends on each individual. But I would say the reason people go to the big cities is because there's more to do. And when you have a lot of options, let's say, for example, if you're in Los Angeles and you want to see a football game, you could go see USC, you can see UCLA, you can see the Rams, you can see the Chargers. But there's a lot of people that go to Disneyland. There's no Disneyland in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. There's no Disneyland in Gainesville, Florida. Those people will go down to Orlando.
Isn't Disneyland open 365 days a year in college football.
Yeah.
You only have 7 home games a year.
Yeah, but there's more interest in Southern California than just going to a college football game.
But I'm just talking about those 7 home dates.
Yeah.
We're not talking about 365 days a year. That's like saying, okay, we're going to compare Christmas to Disneyland. Christmas comes once a year. Disneyland is there every day of the year.
Yeah.
And you're going to cancel Christmas just to go to Disneyland?
No, I just think...
You think about the Pac-12 championship game.
Yeah.
Only comes once a year, and I think the last year they had 17,000 people there in San Francisco for the Pac-12 championship game.
Well, you might have to get... You might have
That's
to...
only once a year.
I hope
and
you're
that's
not...
in California during the wintertime when it's not sunny and you're going to the beach.
Yeah, I hope you're not taking census. There was a lot more than 17,000 people in the stadium. There's a lot of people thought there was closer to 40,000, but that's whoever does the counting. There was a lot more than 17,000. At the same time, there's no one that can argue that people in Southern California don't have as much to do with their time as people in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. There's not a lot to do there.
Let's take Southern California. Let's take USC and UCLA out of the equation.
Yeah.
Because they're not even the top teams in the Pac-12. They're in the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Let's look at other places like Seattle, Washington. You're right there in Seattle, Washington. That weather's inclement as any place in the country where you get rain and snow and everything else. And they're not filling up that stadium up there in Seattle. And especially there at Stanford. You got a 50,000-seat stadium where they had the downside. I saw a game where Stanford played, I think it was Oregon.
Yeah.
And they couldn't even show the upper bowl because it was empty in a 50,000-seat stadium and the sparse population in the lower bowl of that game. And so, I'm still, like I said, I'm still trying to find the definition of where you have a city population in the millions and you can't get 50,000 out for a game.
Well, I think, obviously, you guys' math down south may not be the best because if you look at the University of Washington, they're one of the top attended schools when it comes to sporting events, watching football of anyone in the country. They've even remodeled their stadium. They didn't do that because people aren't coming. So they have
averaged 56,000 people a game last year in a 72,000-seat stadium.
Well,
I did the check on that, so that math was accurate.
You may have done the check on that, but the eyeball test, there's a lot of stadiums in the country that may report that someone did or didn't sell a ticket, but that stadium has as much attendance as anybody in the country. And if you were to take the SEC, you can take Alabama, you can take maybe a Florida, you can take maybe a Georgia or a LSU, and Texas A&M. Those are big stadiums that people fill up, but they're not selling out.
100+ 1,000-seat stadiums. And everybody in the SEC over the last 4 years have expanded their stadium except for LSU because they were already at 102,000.
Yeah.
Missouri expanded their stadium last year.
Right.
Mississippi State expanded their stadium 3 years ago. There's been a wealth of expansion in the SEC, and that expansion comes because you need more seats because people are in dire straits wanting to come to your games.
Well,
and so when you look at the SEC, the smallest stadium you're going to find in the SEC right now, I believe, is 62,000 seats, where in the Pac-12, the smallest stadium is up in Pullman, Washington, at 34,000 seats.
Well, okay, but I did see a game. This is the eyeball test. Because I saw a game where Cal went back and played Ole Miss, and I don't know what they hold, maybe 60,000. There was about 30,000 people in that stadium, and that was a home game at Ole Miss. Even San Jose State out of the Mountain West Conference, they rarely get more than 20,000 people in their stadium. They went down to Arkansas and beat Arkansas, and that stadium must have had about 30,000. So they could have 80,000 seats, but they're not all Alabama, they're not all Auburn, and they're not all Texas A&M. So they can be the top feeder schools. But there's a lot of programs, even South Carolina, when they got beaten by Appalachian State, that stadium holds about 80,000. They must have had about 35,000 people in that stadium. So picking and choosing is one thing, but you have Pac-12 schools that have sellout crowds as much as any of the top teams down in the SEC, and that's the eyeball
Oregon.
test.
I mean, beyond Oregon, show me a Pac-12 school that has consistent sellouts.
Obviously, like I just said, University of Washington has consistent sellouts. If you look at...
They averaged 56,000 a home game last year in a 72,000-seat stadium. So, I mean, I'm trying to do the math.
I would like to know.
I think that's about, 18,000 short.
I want to know where you got your math from because I'm telling you, they have a lot more than that. But everybody has their own opinion.
That was from the Pac-12 during the census. I go through and I look at all the conferences, and the SEC did lead the nation in attendance last year, followed by the Big Ten, even though they're the largest revenue grosser.
That doesn't mean that their football programs are any better. The Pac-12 is number 2 when it comes to winning bowl games, and they have fewer schools to do it with. And that's going to all be solved when USC plays Alabama down in Texas to kick it off. But it is interesting conversation because TV money is going after the people that are going to the games, and they're going after the media markets. So we'll see how the Pac-12 does when it comes up with the SEC and the ACC and a lot of other things too. I want to touch on Big C. Also, I want to just do a little bit of pause on something, because we talk about where people want to go and why is it so important. There are no LA Lakers to go see or LA Clippers to go see in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The money spreads a lot further. There are no Academy Awards. There's no Oscars. There's no Pacific Ocean. There's a lot more to do in Los Angeles than in Tuscaloosa or Gainesville. And I think people know that. I think that just adds to what people do with their dollar, and to me that matters. NBA-wise, if you were to take those same markets, let's say that what's the biggest market in the NBA in the South? Would it be Atlanta? When's the last time the Atlanta Hawks had a sellout? You can't even buy a ticket if you go to a Lakers game or a Clippers game. Even Sacramento Kings have sellouts, and they haven't been in the playoffs in many, many moons. Golden State Warriors, even though they have sellouts, people aren't always going because they haven't winning. But you can't tell me any team in the South that has consistent sellouts. Not Miami. You don't find it in New Orleans. You don't find it in Atlanta. So would you say the same thing, that there's no interest in NBA basketball in the South compared to the West Coast? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I would say NBA is its own different juggernaut versus college is what we were talking about. I mean, it would be like saying, okay, what about NFL games? When you look at a game in the NFL, you just said San Francisco hadn't had a sellout up until this year when you talk about that. So there was no interest in the 49ers. The Oakland Raiders, before they left, they hadn't had a sellout in forever because they tarped off the top part of that stadium with that 12,000 seats that they tarp off to have a fake sellout out there. And the Los Angeles Rams, what was the last time they had a sellout? The Los Angeles Chargers, they play in a 22,000-seat stadium that they can't sell out. So, I mean, if we want to go apples and oranges on that, I mean, that's what you look at in the largest two media markets in California. Nobody could sell out a game.
Well, I just want to, for numbers' sake, I know there's a lot of politicians that throw around numbers like POTUS does, but that's
I'm looking at the eyeball test watching the television when I sit there and see the color of a seat up there in an arena. I mean, and even if you look at that, look at New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans has several universities down in that area, but there's a sellout every time the Saints play in the Dome. There's a sellout now every time that the Pelicans play there in the arena next to them.
I've seen a lot of empty
seats. It all depends on where you are media market-wise. Philadelphia, the Sixers are always selling out, and they're the fifth team in the East in the NBA.
Yeah.
And the Eagles always have a sellout at home. So, I mean, look at the Cleveland Browns. They always have a sellout, and they haven't been competitive in your lifetime.
Now, wait a minute. We got to really go to the eyeball. Sellout, there's someone buying a season ticket, but do they go? You can say the New York Giants. I've been told the New York Giants have had sold-out seats for years, but that doesn't mean people are going to the game because if the team's not good. It's just not going to bring people in. I saw some games when the New York Giants played, even the Jets, and you would think there's about 45,000 people, even though they'll say it's a sellout because they have season ticket holders showing up and buying the ticket and not going. That's not mutually exclusive. I think that's happening in a lot of places around the country. But it is good conversation. I do want to ask you this, though, because we talk about NBA basketball, and I wanted to lead into this. What will be the biggest moves in the NBA this offseason if the current top two teams in the league do not win a championship? The way NBA basketball is played, it's the team that gets hot in that best-of-7 series. We've seen that before. That's why Portland got knocked off last year, and that's by Golden State. That's also why Denver got knocked off by Portland. It's not always the highest-seeded team that's going to get a win, Big C. So if we see L.A., the Lakers, and also Milwaukee that got beat down by Miami, if Miami can avoid Milwaukee, I think they'll be fine. If the Lakers can somehow avoid the Clippers, maybe they'll be fine too, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, also the Lakers got blown out by the Memphis Grizzlies this past week. So, I mean, they're both looking to avoid. But, you know, when you talk about that, what would be the biggest off-season move is if you say the Lakers and the Bucks are the top two teams in the league?
Yeah.
The biggest move that I see, if the Milwaukee Bucks do not win the NBA title, Giannis is gone. And he's not going to L.A. He's going to end up in Golden State. If the Milwaukee Bucks do not win the NBA title this upcoming year, Giannis Antetokounmpo will be a Golden State Warrior next season because they have the contracts in place to make that deal. If you recall, the Golden State Warriors a couple of weeks ago made a move for Andrew Wiggins, who was a former number 1 overall pick by the Cleveland Browns prior to being traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves. His contract and Giannis's contract matches up, as well as the Golden State Warriors have a guaranteed top 5 pick. They could have the number 1 pick in the draft, and they're also going to get another top 10 pick. They will package up those 2 picks, Charlton, along with Wiggins, and send them to Milwaukee for Giannis, because Giannis is going to want to be out of Milwaukee because he doesn't have the outside shooters to keep them intact. And we saw that in Miami just last night when they lost to the Heat, Charlton, the same way that they lost in the playoffs to Toronto last year. They pulled that same defense on them. And if Giannis ends up going to Golden State, then he has 3 guys, Charlton, he can depend on. He's going to have Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green, that he doesn't have to carry the weight every night. So if the Milwaukee Bucks do not win the NBA title this year, you will see a move next year where Giannis Antetokounmpo will end up in the Golden State Warriors uniform, and they will get 3 players back in Milwaukee for that deal, Charlton.
Yeah, they're not going to win the NBA Finals this year. To me, they're just not. I mean, they're front running right now, but I just see when they get to the thick of things and the team. I'm telling you, the team for me lately, coming out of the East, I wouldn't be surprised at all with the Boston Celtics if they learn to defeat Jason Tatum. I know they had a close loss at Houston. I know at home versus Houston, but that game went into overtime. It could have gone either way. They also had a close loss in Los Angeles, but sometimes you don't have your full healthy lineup on the floor. But that's a team. And sometimes the ball bounces a funny way, Big C, and it seems like that East Coast media, you're not going to get the New York Knicks in, even though they just knocked off the Houston Rockets. I have no idea how that happened. They had such a bad outing that even Spike Lee, they're asking him to stay away from the Garden, Big C. So I don't see Milwaukee getting in. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree? Your thoughts?
Well, no, I see Milwaukee making a deep run into the playoffs. Teams know how to defend Milwaukee in the playoffs. The things you have to look at in the playoffs that is not the regular season. You have 4 games to get it right in the playoffs, where during the regular season, you got 82 games to get it right. And it comes down to having the best that you have on a 4-night span in the NBA playoffs, because you have to win 4 games. During the regular season, I mean, you think about it, Milwaukee lost, their 9th game of the season last night to Miami? And everybody thought the sky was falling in. You've lost your 9th game. The Golden State Warriors doesn't even have that double win total of 9-9. They don't have 18 wins on the season and may not end up with that.
But that's intentional,
So you
too.
think about people are counting Milwaukee out, and they lost their 9th game of the season. They don't even have double-digit losses. So that's just basically like an anomaly. I put no weight on what the Miami Heat did to Milwaukee last night.
It's a lot like the same credence I give with Memphis and their win over LA. You're just not going to win every game. Players, I mean, just betting, there's so many things that for reasons for people not to always play their best. But it is exciting NBA basketball, and I still believe that you will have a team, when it comes to the NBA Finals, you'll have a team from the West Coast, either going to be the LA Lakers or the LA Clippers getting in from the West Coast. On the East, I'm going to throw in Boston. I'm not really going to overlook Toronto, but I don't think the league will allow that to happen. There's a way. Was it a foul? Was it a travel? We've seen that before, Big C, so I don't think they're going to let Toronto come in 2 years in a row. But I think Boston, if the Celtics are in the Eastern Conference Finals, ratings go through the roof, at least on the East Coast. I wouldn't be surprised to see Miami, knocking off a team like Milwaukee, because, again, those are large markets. But we'll see what happens, and that's why they play the game. But also, you think about this NFL, this CBA, and we talk about money, whether it's conferences for colleges getting the most money. We always talk about money for baseball. There's money. People making $300 million a year in baseball, $400 million, and still can't bat 300. Why is the NFL Players Union procrastinating? It's inevitable. Just take the vote, get it over with. In fact, they've already voted. They've already had the vote. Now they're waiting to finalize the vote. But the vote's going to happen, and the sooner they do it, the better. Why are they have nothing to stand on, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you need media stories, Charlton. I mean, if you take the vote, what is the media going to talk about after that? This is playing along with the broadcast companies that talk about the NFL every day and have contracts with the NFL to cover their stories. This is the off season. You just went through the combine. Now that the combine is over, what do you have to talk about? Mock drafts. Okay, mock drafts. You got a mock draft every day. Somebody's come out with mock draft 2020 already.
Yeah.
So as you think about that, the biggest story on the hot stove is the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah.
Now, as you think about it, the current one that's in place does not run out until after the 2020 season.
Yeah.
So if you even take a vote on it, all you're doing is extending the one that's in place already, Charlton. It's not going to take place until 2021.
Yep.
You're still going to play under the current 2020 collective bargaining agreement. If they expand it to 17 games, it's not going to take place this season. It's a year removed from where we are. So that's the holdup right now with the players is like, let's play this out for the media to have something to talk about.
Yeah.
This is going to go into play the 2021 season in the NFL, not the 2020 season. We're not going to see an expansion of the season or a shortening of the preseason. I understand that the players want more money. They're not going to get more than the $100,000 that the owners are offering.
Yeah.
They want extended benefits. The benefit that the players should be asking for in this extended season is lifetime health benefits.
Yeah.
That's the thing that the owners are bucking on.
Yep.
But I understand the players want that extra $100,000 because 80% of the NFL is not making $1 million a year.
No.
So that $100,000 check is a lot more money added into their pocket that they're looking at overall. But they need to be looking at lifetime health insurance, get that tossed in before they finalize this agreement.
Big C, that makes too much sense. So we know it's not going to happen if it makes too much sense. But hopefully they'll all come to some kind of agreement that health is more important than an extra $100,000 in the bank. You know, we talk so much about football, and I know you're Southern-centric, how a lot of the Southern media that used to get together beside the BCS, they've always had an SEC team in there to play for a college football national champion, but they haven't always won it. But they've been in there every single year. They've had an SEC team in there. You would have thought they would have won it every year, but they haven't. But I want to get on this push for the race for college football. The national championship is underway as spring football has started all across the country. And I just want to make sure that people, you know, to me it's important. There's a head coach at the University of Nevada. His name is Jay Novell, and he just got a 5-year extension with the University of Nevada, Reno. And he'll, you know, to get them going into the right direction. I know Chris Ault, way back in the 70s, he was responsible for the Division I AA playoffs, and it's grown into now we have the BCS, and everybody's wanting to see more playoffs. But think about this, Big C. You have Mike Norvell, Florida State, Lane Kiffin, Mississippi. You have Eli Derkowitz, Missouri, Mike Leach, Mississippi State. Didn't that good old boy just leave from Washington State? Mel Tucker. I love you in Colorado. You're my favorite team. Well, he went to Michigan State, Big C. Carl Durrell used to be at UCLA. Now he's at Colorado. And Baylor have Dave Aranda. Washington State has Coach Nick Rovelich. Boston College has Jeff Hafley. Arkansas has Sam Pittman. And then Washington has Jimmy Lake because Chris Peterson stepped down. They're already getting ready for double days, Big C, so they can run at a national championship, at least playoff appearance. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you just talked about some Power 5 conferences. You talked about Jay Norvell at Nevada at being an African-American coach getting a 5-year extension. There's also 2 other African-Americans in that list. Mel Tucker and Carl Durrell, African-American coaches. Charlton signed 5-year contracts also here in the past couple of weeks. So as you think about African-American coaches in college football, but you're talking about Power 5 coaches and those coaches that you named off.
Yeah.
Which ones do you feel will be the most successful in their move?
I don't know which one's going to be the most successful because when I look at the teams, whether it's Florida State's been struggling lately. I thought with all the talent that you have in the state of Florida, just like in California for USC, UCLA, I wouldn't think that. My mind says to say Lane Kiffin just because he's an explosive guy, innovative on offense. And I think it might be Lane Kiffin. Some people want to say it be Mike Leach, but Mike Leach, he's had great passing quarterbacks, Big C. Haven't seen them do a lot. I also like Carl Durrell because Colorado was moving up in the recruiting ranks. So they were going to do well even if Tucker had stayed there. But now that he left, they may have a little hangover from that. Outside of that, I really don't see anyone outside of Kiffin that's going to have the biggest splash. And you should always win at Florida State. So Mike Norvell, I'll give him 2, but their program has been on the skids lately, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I like Norvell down at Florida State. When you think about where his offense has been the last 3 years in college football while he was at the University of Memphis, he's been ranked in the top 5 the last 3 years in offense down at the University of Memphis.
Yeah.
And so when I think about the skill set players and how he's been able to coach them up down at Memphis, and he's competed for that conference title, Charlton, for the past couple of years also. It's been between them and Central Florida down there.
Yeah.
So I think that move he's going to make, and he's recruited a lot of players out of that the Florida area, Charlton, coming up to Memphis to play, and now he can recruit right there in that backyard. And when you look at the backing that he's going to get there at Florida State, Charlton, there's not going to be a shortcoming when it comes to monies and boosters willing to help out that program. I like where Norvell sits. He really has one team that he has to be challenged with in that conference, and that's Clemson versus when you look at Leach and you look at Kiffin in the SEC, where they've had such a rise of teams. You look at the dominant teams in the SEC. You're talking about LSU. You're talking about Alabama, Florida, Georgia. These teams that have competed, and been in the top 10 in the country, and you also have Texas A&M, which won't be a slouch down there, and other teams. Tennessee risen from the ashes. They had 8 wins last year. So I think when you look at Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach, they're going to have the toughest road, as well as the new coach down at Arkansas.
Yeah, they'll all have a tough road. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Spreaker.com and the apps that I really love. And just say it now. Say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear Welcome to the Show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he will do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Really appreciate the way that's going. Also proud to launch our real estate listing channel in the spring of 2020. Simply looking for 100 real estate brokers that want to list their real estate properties on television, and that makes a big difference for a lot of people trying to find properties. I want to just close with 2 things. We have the debates going on. We have the primaries. Everybody voted in California. Hopefully today, I know I cast my vote, Big C. Really is down to Biden and also Sanders. I love watching CNN when I get home to watch those guys play with the maps, Big C, to see how many people from Opa-locka County has checked in, or Tucaloosa County, or Uya County. That's always fun for me to watch, so I hope a lot of people go out and vote. But just in follow-up to what you were saying about some of these programs that have major media markets like Los Angeles or San Francisco, and maybe the Pac-12 revenue is not as much as you have in the Big 12 or the Big 10 or the SEC. There's something called How to Watch Live Sports Without Cable TV. Silicon Valley is the innovator when it comes to streaming technologies in California. That's one of the regions of the country where a lot of people, they do things electronically and not necessarily fighting the traffic to go to a stadium and watch a game for the couple of 3 or 4 hours, Big C. So that's something that's also affecting television rights. And I know you too. You one of the guys that told me first about how to get your TV free. So you don't have Nielsen coming to your house, seeing if Big C's sitting at home watching football games or going to the stadium. So I think that same technology, that's one of the reasons. The technology's here on a lot of the West Coast cities, and it may be a little bit later before it gets to some of the smaller communities. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, no, Charlton, technology follows everybody everywhere. That technology is on the West Coast, it's all the way across the country. And you just say it's in the Bay Area, that means that it would not be in Denver. It would not be in Washington, Charlton. It would not be in Arizona. So it's in every city in the U.S. It's in Waco, Texas, as well as it's in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It's there. It's about what the desire of the individuals are when we talk about the eyeball test.
Yeah.
If you desire to go to McDonald's drive-through to get your meal, then that's what you desire to do. That eyeball test meets your standard.
Yeah.
If you want to go to a place where you got to read off the menu and they have no pictures, then that's the eyeball test of integrity that you have to meet your standard.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing when we look at going to sporting events. If you choose to go to a sporting event in your city, and everybody doesn't have an NBA team and everybody doesn't have an NFL team.
Yeah.
But there are cities that have all of those things, as well as NHL teams, Charlton, that pack the arena in the South and in the Northeast and in the Midwest.
Yep.
So it's about what the individual's desires are. If you want to drive a Mercedes, you drive a Mercedes. If you want to drive a Ford, you drive a Ford. It meets your eyeball test.
Yeah, it's all about that consumer demand. And in closing, slavery began in 1619, that's 401 years ago, and now African Americans are deciding who will become the president of the United States of America. It's like they're recruiting kids to play college sports. They're always asking about the African American now. I hope that people pay attention to the vote. Big C, back in the day, there was a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, with all you got to use, how can you lose? Rumble, young man, rumble. Big C, what are you looking forward to in the sports universe?
Well, Charlton, we always look at great things in the sport universe. I want to look at something in African-American history. On this day in 1991 in Los Angeles, California, America got to witness what African-Americans had been knowing for decades and years, Charlton. The most horrific beating that we ever saw on television of a human being by the Los Angeles Police Department when they beat Rodney King. Over half a dozen officers beat Rodney King for over 12 minutes, being videoed on tape.
Well, that's one of the things that Bloomberg can be proud about, because he was about stop and frisk just like POTUS. Don't worry about stop and frisk. We want to get rid of that, and you can too, every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide when you follow Big C Sports on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them good old boys down south. As we always tell you, there's never, ever an excuse for domestic violence. If you know any man or woman going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and call 911, because no man or woman should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.